Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are happy to have you around. My name is Gift Zombo. I am the moderator for the session. For this session today, I think this is our fourth webinar on preparing risk and opportunities registers. And we have our speaker already ready for the presentation. Her name is Phyllis Mungai, who is the Senior Legal and Compliance Officer. And then Joseph will also be presenting. And most of you know Joseph. He's our Deputy Executive Director at HPHRC, and I will be moderating the session. So we are starting with the introductions and setting the context, which I'm already doing now. You all know an opportunity register is a very important tool for risk management and governance. That's why we are taking you through this session on the step process of developing risk and opportunities registers. So, but before we go to the presentation itself, we are going to get an overview, which will be done by Joseph, our Deputy Executive Director, and also the PI of the GGP-VA project, which will take about 6 minutes up to 16:10. And then from 16:10 to 17 hours, we're going to have a webinar presentation by Phyllis on developing risks and opportunities register. And then the remaining 30 minutes, we're going to do a Q&A. We're going to have a Q&A session. Okay, just to tell you that there is a Q&A session. There's a Q&A feature in this particular screen. I think it is just one of the. If you check down there next to your taskbar, you'll find a Q&A feature. So basically, use that to post any questions or comments. And we will continues. And then we're going to have a Q&A session in the next 30 minutes now to address the questions which have remained by then. So I wish to welcome Joseph to give us an overview of APHRC and of the GGP-VA project. Over to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Gift, and welcome everybody. We are delighted that you could join. Gift keeps talking about GGP-VA project. This is a good grant practice virtual academy project, which is being run by APHRC. APHRC is basically a research center based in Africa, headquartered in Nairobi, and with our West Africa regional office in Senegal. Besides research, we build capacities of individuals and also institutions to be able to contribute to African development. And we have our vision as transforming lives in Africa through research. And for that to happen, the research has to be done. And that research used in decision making. And we talk about decisions, it's not just about policy. It could be the way to deliver a service. It could be how to implement a program. It could be an innovation or a tool. It could also be about individual and community behavior. In the area of capacity strengthening, we have been seeking to strengthen the R&D ecosystem in Africa. And so we are using different ways of engaging to make this environment we have in Africa better for our people to be more productive. And this good grant practice project is one of such initiatives where we are seeking to build the capacities of individuals and institutions using the good financial grant practice standard as a basis. And essentially, what we have done is to come up with courses that takes people through the main areas of the GFGP. That is financial management, human resource management, procurement, and governance. And governance includes audit. So these courses are being hosted in the Virtual Running Academy. And so far, we have had more than 600 people who have done these courses, coming from almost 200 institutions. And in addition to the courses, we are having the institutions go through FGP and preparing them for eventuation. Besides that, we are doing webinars like the one we have to deepen understanding of particular areas. So today, risk, we have had one on internal controls, we have had one on record keeping, and we'll keep having these seminars at least once a month. So mine is to really welcome you to this webinar and to request you to be very active. Ask all the questions you need to ask. There's a team from APHRC that will be very happy. Thank you very much to you. And my camera, this has put me on the road. I'll be driving as I reason on. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, for your comments and for giving us an overview of APHRC and the Good Grant Practice Virtual Academy program. So without much ado, I would like to welcome Phyllis Mungai, our Senior Legal and Compliance Officer, to take us through the topic, Developing Risk and Opportunities Register. Welcome, Phyllis.
Thank you so much, Gift. Please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. It's great to see how many people have already joined, and it's only 10 minutes past the hour. So as Gift has said, my name is Phyllis Mungai, and I'm a lawyer by profession, as well as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I hold a master's degree in management and organizational development. And at APHRC, I'm the senior legal and compliance officer. And I also double as the risk officer. That's the reason that we're going to go through this session with you today. So without further ado, I want to go straight into the presentation. I'm hoping that familiar or have an idea of what risk management is. And even if we don't, I'm going to start from an area where we all understand what risk management is, what a risk is, what an opportunity is, then we'll go into development of a risk register. So I look forward to engaging with you at the plenary session. For now, we'll go right into the presentation. Please go ahead.
Sure, please go ahead. I can see your screen. Your PowerPoint is okay. It's on point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So as I said, I'll be taking you through this session on how to develop risk and opportunities register. But before we do that, I want us to first look at what a risk is, define it, also define what an opportunity is, and also define risk management as a whole. Thereafter, we are going to delve into risks and opportunities separately. Then once we've done that and understood what that entails, we'll then move on to understanding how to develop a risk and opportunities register. Then lastly, we'll look at best practices as well as the importance of risk management. So I want to start this session with a case study. And I'm sure we all know of the Boeing Airlines or manufacturer, sorry, particularly the 737 MAX, which crashed in October 2018. That was in Indonesia, as well as in March 2019 in Ethiopia. And there are quite a number of similarities between these two crashes, and there's a reason why I chose to talk about Boeing in particular, and for us to also tie in how risk management failures can cost organizations or institutions. So just a brief history. Boeing is the world's largest airplane manufacturer and has been since the 1900s. And unfortunately, in 2018 as well as 2019, they had two huge crashes in two different areas that ended up in the death of 346 people. So what are the similarities of these two crashes? One, apart from them both being Boeing aircrafts, both pilots reported technical difficulties and they struggled to gain altitude shortly after liftoff. This led the plane to nosedive and leading to a crash. All of this happened within 50 minutes after takeoff. So you might ask yourself, what went wrong and what happened to Boeing? Boeing has been in operation since the early 1900s, and they were known for innovation, and not only that, but also safety. So again, just a little story behind this. There is another airline manufacturer known as Airbus, and Airbus was a competitor of Boeing. However, Airbus came into operation in the 1970s, which is many years after Boeing had already been operating. But because of how well they made their planes, they managed to catch up to Boeing. And because of Boeing's need to still have market share, they decided that what they're going to do is take the 737 airplane and modify it engine and call it the 737. So this is not what ordinarily engineers would do. An airplane should be made from scratch, but they were cutting corners, and because of that, they decided to install a new software system that would assist the plane not to crash because of the heavy engine. What they didn't know is they did not anticipate the planes would also nosedive down because of malfunctions of a system. So we can see what went wrong here. Firstly, Boeing did not create a plane that was made for the engine that it had. They also relied on a single faulty sensor, which was known as the MCAS system. That's the software system. Secondly, general practice dictates that pilots have to be trained or informed on how to handle any new software that's put in any plane, and this did not happen. Lastly, Boeing's management also ignored internal warnings from their engineers regarding the risks that would occasion the plane, because they wanted to save time and money. Remember, training people requires a lot of time, and also it would mean that they would have to hold on to their planes a bit longer. And remember, their main goal was to be stronger or to do better than Airbus. So this was a very huge failure for them, as you can imagine. And there were several consequences that befell Boeing. First, they were asked to ground all of their aircrafts. And this happened shortly after the March 2019 crash. The total months of grounding was 20 months. So in those 20 months, Boeing was not allowed to make any aircrafts or even engage any airlines. Secondly, they lost over 20 billion, and this is because they had to compensate the airlines as well as the victims of the crash that happened. And there are also massive reputational and legal consequences that befell them. Remember, this is a very large organization, renowned within the States, within, almost all airlines all have a Boeing airplane. So no other airplane wanted to deal with Boeing at all. And they've also had issues with their regulator, because remember, during investigations, the regulator found out that they actually knew about the new software system. They did not inform the pilots nor the airlines, and they also ignored the warnings from engineers. So all of these are the consequences that befell Boeing, but I think the most important and the saddest was the loss of life. 346 people is really a huge number. So this is just to show you what happens when you don't take risk management into account when you're going about your day-to-day, be it in your project, be it in your organization. And it can be a very single or a very minute thing that makes your organization or your project fail in a huge way. So now we're going to look at what is a risk. And the International Organization for Standardization defines a risk as any uncertain event that could affect the achievement of objectives. Then we have the Project Management Institute, which defines project risk as an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, either has a positive or a negative effect on project objectives. So as you can see, these two definitions are very similar, but the key thing is that there's uncertainty, and that uncertainty leads to an effect on your objectives. That could be your project objectives as well as your organizational objectives. So this effect that we're talking about that can befall your objectives, it can either be positive or negative. When it's negative, we call it a threat. That is the downside of a risk, and it leads to failure to achieve whatever you've set out to do. And if it's positive, we call it an opportunity. And this is the upside of a risk, where you actually achieve what you intended to do. I'm sure many of us are familiar with risk management, or we call it enterprise risk management frameworks. Most of these frameworks don't focus on opportunities. However, in this webinar, we're going to try as much as possible to delve into opportunities which are positive risks, because in as much as we're trying to ensure that our organizations or our projects do not suffer any ill, it's also good to see what uncertainty or what event that can come out from our objectives and end up being a positive thing. Okay, so now to understand and opportunity. A quote by Warren: risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. Essentially, that means that risks don't exist in a vacuum. So we have to have clearly defined objectives. And once you have those clearly defined objectives or goals, then you can be able to identify your risks and opportunities. So you don't start with risks, then you determine your objectives or goals. You start with your goals or objectives. Then from there, you ask yourself, what can go wrong? Or for opportunities, what can go right? So it's important to also ensure that your objectives are aligned to the strategic plan of the organization, which is the ultimate intent of an organization. We've already mentioned that risks are potential negative or adverse events, while opportunities are potential positive events, which can either help achieve or derail your objectives. A key thing to note here is that both risks and opportunities are uncertain. It means you don't know whether it's going to happen or not. You're not sure whether it's going to happen or not. And so because of this, an organization must proactively identify, assess, and manage manage the risks in order to achieve strategic goals. The goal here is not to eliminate uncertainty. It's not possible to do that. However, the best you can do is to manage either the risk towards a favorable outcome. So now we're going to look at what risk management means. And risk management is a structured and systematic process that helps organizations identify, assess, and control risks that could affect their objectives. And those risks can either be threats, where they have negative impacts, or they can be opportunities where they have positive impacts. And if you look at the icon at the hand side, you can see the process of risk management, process and systematic. You have to follow the arrows as they are, and this is the next step we're going to. So we're going to look at how to identify risks. Then we will combine analysis and evaluation of the risks. Then we'll go to treatment and finally to monitoring. This is also the process of developing a risk and opportunities register. So as we go through these steps, have that in mind, that this is the same as having or developing a risk and opportunities register. So a risk register or a risk and opportunities register is a document that serves as a central repository for all identified risks to a project, process, or organization. It lists potential threats and opportunities, their potential likelihood and impact, and the planned response or mitigation measures. And you can see at the very top, the green diagram shows you the risk, the description, the risk owner, likelihood, impact, the risk rating, risk treatment, and opportunity. We will take a look, an in-depth look into this a bit later, but I just want you to have an image of what a risk and opportunity register looks like. A key thing to remember and note is that the risk register is a living document. That means it's updated regularly to reflect new information and is used to prioritize risks as well as assign ownership and provide visibility and accountability. So it's very important that once you have a risk and opportunities register in place, don't just put it aside. You have to keep on looking at it and reviewing it. Best practice dictates monthly, but quarterly is also okay. So now we'll go to the first step, which is risk identification. And this is the process of documenting any risks that could keep an organization or a project from reaching its objective. The main goal of identifying risk or the risk identification process is to generate a comprehensive list of risks that may impact any goal or activity you have. And identifying certain methods and techniques include brainstorming, where you come together and you think through what can affect your objectives or you from attaining your objectives. You can also have stakeholder interviews where you have your partners, where you have your clients come together with you to discuss what you think might affect your objective or goals. Then you can also undertake a root cause analysis. Interviews are also a great way of identifying risks. There's also scenario analysis, where you look at what the best case scenario and worst case scenario is. If I'm to give an example of the Boeing case study, so it came to be known that they actually had a risk analysis and in fact, a scenario analysis to that effect. And they were okay with the event that the plane could crash once every 2 years. Obviously, that was not a great way to go about it, but they had undertaken a scenario analysis. Then you can also undertake a SWOT analysis, where you look at your strengths, your weakness, your opportunities and threats. You can also look at lessons learned from previous projects, previous programs, or consult experts or consultants. The second step in developing a register, as well as the second step in risk management, is risk analysis and assessment. When we're talking about risk analysis, we are talking about examining the risks you've identified. And the reason you do this is to understand how likely they are to happen, the probability of them happening, and if they actually do happen, how serious the impact can be. So this process helps you to understand the level of risk, which is mostly either low, medium, or high. Once you analyze, it's important to assess, and you can look at the right-hand side where there's a risk assessment matrix. And you can see there's probability versus the impact, and the different, the matrix shows you how you can categorize the different risks. So under assessment, the goal is to prioritize the risks based on the impact and likelihood, so that you can determine which risks are high, which ones are medium, and which ones are low. And this also helps you manage your resources, because for major risks, it means they need immediate attention. And that means that you will need to put in a lot of resources in order to manage them. For minor risks, you don't need to have a lot of resources there, but it's very important to always monitor. Remember, we said a register is a living document. And so if you don't constantly monitor your risks, a low risk can end up being a high risk, because you're not monitoring it, and there are no reactive measures that are being put in place. So now we'll move on to the third step, which is treatment of risks, stroke opportunities. And I will start with treatment for risks. So we've already identified our risks, we've analyzed them and we've assessed them. So what do we do next? We need to figure out how to treat. And for risks, which is the negative side or a threat, there are quite a number of ways you can ensure that you safeguard yourself. The first is to avoid. And here you discontinue pursuing the activity, the project, or objective. This happens where the objective is not something that you really need to pursue. Then the second is reduction or mitigation. And here you put in place control measures in order to reduce the likelihood and or the impacts of the risk materializing. Then the third is to transfer, and essentially this is where you share the risk with third parties. You can do this through partnering with other institutions or collaborators, or as well as getting insurance covers, so that in case the risk materializes, then you have something to fall back on. Then the fourth treatment action is to retain or to accept. This is recommended mainly for low risks or where the costs outweigh the benefits, or also when no treatment is available. The best example I can give here is when we had the pandemic, there was basically nothing anyone could do at the moment. So that is something we just accepted. However, in as much as you're accepting the risk, you still need to monitor it. Then we'll move on to opportunities and how to treat them. So the first is to exploit, and here you take definitive action to ensure the opportunity is realized. Then you can also enhance or increase the probability of the opportunity occurring. You can also share or allocate ownership to a third party who is better to able capture the opportunity. And fourthly, you can escalate it, meaning you address the risk at a higher organizational level, especially if it's outside the project or program's scope to manage. And mostly this is escalated either to senior management or the board of directors. Then lastly, you also can accept, where you acknowledge that the opportunity, and you accept it if it occurs, but you don't take any proactive action to pursue it, because either way you can see that it's most likely going to materialize. So we're going to go on to the fourth step, which is risk ownership, monitoring, and control. We'll start with risk ownership, which means assigning responsibility for each risk to a specific person or team. And the risk owner is accountable for monitoring the risk and making sure it's managed properly. So for each individual risk, each individual opportunity, you need to allocate one person responsibility, and that helps with accountability as well as monitoring. Then we go on to risk monitoring, which involves regularly tracking risks to see if their likelihood or impact has changed, as well as whether the existing measures that have been put in place are working, and tracking risks that remain after a risk response has been implemented. So basically, once you've assessed your risks, remember we said risks are not static. So a low risk might end up being a high risk or a medium risk. And in order to prevent that, you need to constantly monitor. Then we move on to risk control, and this focuses on assessing whether the implemented risk responses, for example, transferring the risk or reduction, are working as expected. And if they're not, you can also decide if new or more effective strategies are needed. And this is very important because sometimes you can be implementing your treatment actions, but they're probably not working as well as you'd want them to. So without controlling, it would mean that your risks are likely to materialize. I'll give the example of Boeing again, and where they should have undertaken risk control. The moment the first plane went down, and the fact that they knew what was making the planes go down, they should have put a pause and made sure that they've trained the pilots and ensured that the systems, the software system was working well enough. But they failed to do this, and this led to the second crash. So these steps that we've mentioned, step 1 to 4, are what ensure that risks as well as opportunities are continuously managed and kept within acceptable limits. So now I just want us to have a walkthrough of this risk register. And this is an excerpt from a project risk register from APHRC. This was specifically for a research project. And as you can see, the first thing you do is to identify what your goal is or your objective is. And this team's objectives were to collect data in 7 countries. So once they defined the objective, the second thing was to identify the risk or describe the risk. And the first risk they identified was security risk, particularly terrorism. And they are very specific about that because there are very many different types of security risks. So once they did that, they proceeded to identify the key risk indicators. A key risk indicator is a warning system, something that lets you know that perhaps this risk is going to materialize, or it gives you an indication that you need to be careful. So for them, their key risk indicator was the number of security incidents that are recorded. So they followed that with what effect it would have if this security risk incident or terrorism attack happened. What would happen? The effect would lead to delays in project implementation. There's also a second one, which is safety of staff members being at risk. And the next step was to assess what this risk would mean in terms of the likelihood as well as the impact. So for the likelihood, they gave it a score of moderate, meaning it was likely to happen, more likely to happen than not. But the impact would be very severe because of the effects that we've just mentioned. So because of that, and sorry, you can't see the numbers, but this is a multiplication. So we multiply impact versus the likelihood to get the overall score. So 15 is very high when we're looking at the scoring. And that means this was the first risk that they needed to manage under this project. Then we head over to the treatment action, and the first we had was intelligence sharing within the different project sites. And the second one was employee training. This includes evacuation drills and handling hostage situations. Then still under ownership now, we had to put the title of the person responsible. So we wrote project manager. In some cases, we actually write the name, but we'll just have project manager in this instance because they are essentially responsible for what happens within the project. And lastly, they have a timeline, and this helps with monitoring, ensuring that risks are controlled and that the treatment actions are being applied as indicated. So for them, the team, their timeline was that they would undertake this treatment action as well as monitoring of this risk every month and every quarter. So now let's look at best practices, the do's and don'ts when it comes to developing a risk and opportunities register. So the first do is to engage stakeholders early for a complete understanding of any potential risks and opportunities. And the reason for doing this early is so that you have enough time to brainstorm and come up with preventative measures or mitigation measures, as well as properly understand the terrain that you're working in. Then secondly, it's encouraged to use very clear and consistent language. Always describe risks in a way that everyone can easily understand. A risk register is a document that is utilized by everyone within an organization. So it's important not to have any jargon within it. Then thirdly is to keep the register dynamic. Update the register as often as possible and as often as the project or organization evolves. Then fourthly is to assign clear ownership, that is identify who's responsible for the risk, for monitoring it, and ensuring that the risk is kept under control. This is very important because if you don't assign anyone a risk or opportunity, I mean, it means you've just left it up in the air and you won't have anyone to follow up with. So it's always important to assign someone the ownership role. Then fifth is to prioritize effectively. This is when we talk about prioritizing, we're talking about assessing the risks. When we're talking about low risks, medium risks, and high risks, you have to focus on the most significant risks and opportunities, the ones that would affect your goals, and those are the ones you begin dealing with. Then the next is to document response actions. This is very important to clearly outline mitigation measures and enhancement strategies under each entry. Not only is it good during the moment you're developing the register, but also in hindsight, it helps people look back and see what worked in a different project or let's say in a different calendar year, and it can help other project teams or the institution later on to see what worked well and how best they can manage the risks. Then lastly is to communicate frequently. It's very important to share updates with management as well as project teams and to keep everyone informed. This is again important because remember we said a risk register is a living document and it changes frequently. Now we're going to move to the don'ts. And the first one is don't treat a register as a one-time exercise, the development of a register as a one-time exercise. Risk management is an ongoing process. So those steps that we mentioned, step 1 to 4, you have to keep on doing the same thing over and over again. it doesn't end at having a person who's in charge of the risks. You just have to continue with the identification, be it monthly, be it quarterly. Secondly, don't use vague descriptions. So avoid unclear terms like issues may arise when you're, for example, when you're listing the effect of a risk. Giving an example of the security risk that we just looked at, it was very clear that the team said that the staff would end up being hurt, and the project objectives also would be delayed. So you have to be specific what exactly is not going to go okay. Because once you're specific, then you're able to see how best to treat the risk. Then thirdly is don't ignore opportunities. It's easy to forget opportunities because they are positive and, you're mostly concerned about things going wrong, not things going right. However, it's important because sometimes opportunities can bring about benefits that you did not envision and which can propel your organization or project. Then the fourth one is don't neglect to follow up. Always monitor, review to ensure that the mitigation actions you've put in place are effective. And if they're not effective, then you can think about what else to do, what other strategies you can have in place. And lastly, don't hide or downplay risks. I think this is the greatest lesson from the Boeing case study. They downplayed a very huge safety risk, which led to a lot of consequences. And in the end, it also builds a lot of trust and transparency. So why is risk management important? First, when you undertake risk management effectively, it leads to you protecting the organizational assets and resources. For example, for Boeing, they intended to have more market share than Airbus, but they ended up in losing their assets as well as their resources in trying to fix the consequences of what had happened. Secondly, is to ensure business continuity. I can tell you for a fact, Boeing is still struggling to this day. They are way below Airbus, and it's not looking like they'll get to them anytime soon. They even had a recent incident of, I think last year, where a door just flew wide open mid-air. So you can tell that they still have a lot of work to do. And because of this, their business is suffering. Then thirdly, it enhances decision making, especially when you're going through uncertain times. And this is what helps management also decide where the resources are going to go in order to handle the high risks so that they don't affect the organizational objectives or goals. And lastly is to safeguard the reputation of the organization as well as ensure regulatory compliance. Again, I think we can see this from Boeing. Their reputation suffered a huge blow. It still does. Now they are heavily regulated because of what happened then. So I'm going to end my presentation with this quote, which says, always hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. When you're undertaking your projects, when it's risk management for the organization, we never want to think about what can go wrong, but it's always important to be ready in case it does. Thank you very much for your time. I'll hand over to Gift in case there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis, for a very insightful session. And thank you very much also for keeping time. And thank you for the participants also for being active on the main chat and also on the Q&A feature. So I think we can now go to the Q&A session. We have a few questions which are still pending. I think we have addressed some of them, but we have about 3 questions because one of them is repeated. We have about 3 questions which are still pending. Oh, they have now increased to 4. And maybe Dr. Farouk Riskua, your question, I think we had responded on it on the chat, but you have put it on again. So basically, maybe you could clarify what exactly you want us, or what exactly the clarity that you needed. Maybe you can unmute and just clarify the question. Dr. Farouk, you have a question on risk management process. Okay, maybe I can read it out so that the facilitator can respond to it.
Yeah,
so
actually, somebody would have needed to unmute him. So whoever is controlling the call would be the one to unmute him.
Okay. Wilfred, are you able to unmute?
He's unmuted. He can go ahead and speak. He's unmuted.
Dr. Farouk, please go ahead. Okay, maybe I can go through the question on his behalf. The question is, how can someone monitor and review risk since it comes from not knowing what one is doing?
Sorry, Gift, how can someone monitor?
Monitor and review the risk. That is basically the last step on risk management process. So he's asking, how can someone monitor and review risk since it comes from not knowing what one is doing?
Okay. Should I answer that first?
Yeah, I think we can take them one by one, but okay. Yeah, you can answer that.
Okay. Dr. Farouk, perhaps you didn't catch me quite well. What is uncertain is the risk, but what you're doing is very certain. And I'll give the example of going to a 3 or 4, and you have plans for your project. You even have a goal. You have a team is very much. What you don't know is, will I in there be fair? Will there be, say, for example, a government directive that means I cannot go like this? What is uncertain? So because you is every event that you think might, and then from those events you list assess affect me the most it was to happen. Government directive would mean go into the field at all. If it's they only happen 3 months, so you can plan around it. That essentially is how you monitor and review your objectives. and what you do is because of you trying to implement your there now. Hear me?
Sorry, I was speaking while muted. Okay, thank you very much. So, read the second question from Ama, and the question is: for a team just started the minimum viable structure for a risk register, is it just a sheet with risk impact and mitigation?
Gift, you're breaking up. Gift. And you up.
Okay, the question is for a team.
Yes.
What is the structure?
Still hear you, Gift. My end. Can you hear me?
Yes. I go through it again. I think it is.
It's on the chat.
Yeah. It's Q&A feature. Just
okay, I see it. It's by
yeah.
So he asks for a team just starting, what is minimum viable structure for a risk register? Is it just a spreadsheet with risk impact probability mitigation, or is there more we absolutely need? To answer that, it helps as many categories as you can. I say that because you will not forever be starting out. You will get to a point where you're dealing with a huge project, a huge program, or even a whole institution. So it's important to know all the categories. But if I was to choose, I would say the description of the risk is very important. That is obviously after you have identified your objectives. Then you also need to have impact probability and the overall score. You need to have mitigation. You need to identify who's going to be in charge of the risks and the timelines. So I would say those 5 are the most important, but it doesn't hurt to have all the others. As I said, you never know, when you'll be called upon to undertake a larger assessment. Then for his second question, he says, beyond the common brainstorming techniques, what are some less obvious? Sorry? Is someone talking? Okay.
So, sorry, please proceed.
All right. Beyond the common brainstorming techniques, what are some less obvious but effective methods for uncovering hidden risks or latent opportunities? I would say looking at what are they called? Forecasts. For example, some organizations, for example, the Deloitte, the KPMGs, sometimes put out alerts that can easily help you in determining, some risks that might occur in the near future or opportunities also. Another less obvious one would be uh, expert opinions or, um, interviews from people who are experts in their fields and are always talking about the occurrences around them. Those are the two I can think of, top of my head, but there are quite a number of other ways. Sometimes you can even look at what other organizations are doing, and I don't want to say copy, but you can look at what other organizations are doing and borrow a leaf. Then the last question, for cultural reasons, how can we foster a blame-free culture where team members feel comfortable raising risks without fear of being punished for identifying problems? Oh, this is a good question. And this is a totally different area of risk management where you also have to look at the culture of the organization or the teams. And if I'm to go back to the case study of Boeing, there were actually whistleblowers within Boeing itself, the engineers who came forward to tell management that, these planes are not safe to fly and they should not be out there. However, what happened is they were shut down, some were fired because of raising such concerns. And what I would say is when it comes to cultural things, it always has to be the tone at the top that dictates what happens. If the management is not willing to take risk management seriously, if they're not willing to to listen to people who raise concerns, then it means the whole organization will probably not come forward. So it's a tough one, but I'd say it has to be management or the people at the very top who set the tone for how the organization or the teams will work. Gift, do you want to take over the other questions? I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. There's still others. Some of them we are addressing them online.
All
I
right.
think there's.
Let me just go to the next one. Anonymous attendee asks, do you develop individual risk stroke opportunity registers for each project, as each project can be unique in its own right? Yes, that's very important. Every project needs to have its own risk and opportunity register because there's no project that's the same. There is a misconception that sometimes projects can share risk registers, but no, they cannot. The most they can do is share the template, but the content that is in the register itself has to be unique because it has to be tied to the objectives of that project. Okay, next question is from Gloria. She asks, can we have a new risk register, maybe each quarter, instead of updating one continuously? Because a lot may change about a certain risk, e.g. likelihood of happening or impact it would have. Also, it would help in studying the trends. Thank you, Gloria. This is a really good question. So, administratively speaking, it would be very tedious to have a new register every quarter. It doesn't mean that because you're updating the same one, you'll have it forever. I'll give an example of what happens at APHRC. Towards the end of every year, we update the risk register and it's maintained for exactly 1 year. So that means in as much as the risks or opportunities are changing in likelihood, it can be in the rating itself. However it's changing, it's recorded, but it's still maintained within that register. Then at the end of the year, when a review is being done, that is when you can now have the new ratings given the treatment actions or given what has occurred during the year. But to say that you want to change it quarterly may be too hectic, and you might also end up having too many registers that are scattered. I hope that answers you. And the next question is from Jude. He asks, how can one tailor risk management approaches to address specific business needs or goals, say in the education sector? How can one tailor risk management approaches to address specific needs or goals, say in the education sector? I'm not sure I understand what you mean. I don't know whether we can unmute Jude for him to ask the question. Gift? Hello, Gift.
Unmuted, Jude.
Okay, great.
Jude, you can ask your question.
Okay, I think as we wait for him, we can proceed. Is that okay, Gift?
Yes, you can proceed with the next one.
Okay. Um, the next question is from Lucy Kebe, and she asks, do we treat risk as an assumption or a likelihood? I would say an assumption because you don't want to confuse likelihood with the assessment of the risk. So risk is an assumption. You're not sure whether it's going to occur or whether it won't. So all you're doing is reality, and especially that you won't be left stranded in terms of you can't continue with your project, or you cannot, as an organization, continue existing because the risk has probably affected you to that point of you can't recover. So I would say it's an assumption. Then when you come to the assessment of it, you now look at the probability of it happening or the likelihood of it happening, which is something you determine by looking at any trends you have from the past. For example, let me say you have a risk on your register as a pandemic happening. It doesn't have to be COVID, another one. And your likelihood now, because you know 2020 was real, your likelihood will be moderate because you saw it can happen, as opposed to before where it could have been, unlikely. So I would say treat it as an assumption, and then when it comes to assessment, you can look at the likelihood of it. Next question is from Naomi, and she asks, how can one categorize risk, e.g. into strategic, compliance, finance, etc.? That's a good question, Naomi. So there are various categories of risks, and I'll give you the three major ones. So there's strategic risks, which affect your strategic objectives or your strategic plan. Then you have your operational risks, which affect your operation or day-to-day activities. Then you have your project risks. And those are the three broad categories. Then under each, you can now have compliance risk, you can have reputational risk, you can have financial risk, security risk, so on and so forth. But the three main categories, which also flow from how organizations are, think of it as a pyramid. At the very top, you have strategic goals, which means you must have strategic risks, and then you have your operational goals, and then lastly, you have your project goals. I hope that answers you. Going on to the next question. Could it be that a risk is subjective? That's a good question. And I think this is why brainstorming is important, because you also now get to really get to the root cause of it. And actually, also a root cause analysis is one of the ways that you can identify risks. Sometimes a risk can be someone can think of a risk as something very, drastic, while another person might view it as insignificant. So when you come together as a team, or when you conduct stakeholder interviews and you properly dissect whatever it is you think will affect your objectives, then now you can be able to get to the bottom of it. You can have a challenge as opposed to a risk, and this is a very common thing. For example, you can have let me think of something. Maybe a risk of staff being late, or not coming to work on time. But that is not a risk, that's more of a challenge. So what helps with coming together and discussing when you're identifying risks is you can also identify that some of these things are challenges and not necessarily risks, because being late is something that you have control over. However, if the person is not being able to come to work because of, say, for example, an earthquake, then in that case, the earthquake is what is the risk, and the effect would be the person being late. So having these meetings where you discuss within your teams, it can also be within departments. When you come together, you can properly be able to identify what is a risk, a challenge, shouldn't be. Okay. He asked, is the living mirror of a risk?
I think it is he was just trying to provide more information, more clarity on the issue register and risk register. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. So there's another question. If risk management falls under our control, particularly in the case of prolonged security issues, what possible mitigation strategies can we adopt to ensure the equity and integrity of evidence collection? So in this instance, you're assuming that the security issues are not coming to an end. And remember one of the treatment actions we mentioned was you can avoid. So you can decide that you will no longer undertake the project. Obviously, that is a huge blow, but perhaps you can decide maybe not to work in that particular area and restructure your proposal and approach the donor and ask them whether you can undertake the same study in a different place. But it wouldn't make sense for you to continue hoping that the security issues are going to become any better if at all the signs are showing that it's not going to be possible or feasible for you to undertake the project. So sometimes you can choose to avoid, which can come at a cost, but it's better than you proceeding with the project and you end up with, staff who lose their lives or even the entire project just doesn't work out. All right. I don't know if there are any more questions.
There is a question by Khalifa.
Yes.
He's asking, in the case where the risk was not foreseeable but arose during the project implementation, what do you do in this case?
Okay. That's a good question, Khalifa. So this happens a lot. And what the best practice is, the moment you identify it as a risk is when you start the process of managing it. So even if you had a register that had been in place for 6 months, and the 7th month you discover there's this new risk, you now put it on your register and you start the process of managing that risk. So that means from identifying it to assessing to identifying what treatment actions you can have in place and how best you can manage that risk. So you can always modify your register at any point, provided that the risks are rising. And also, if the opposite, if you had a risk and 6 months later this risk has ceased existing, then you also remove it from the register because you need to focus on the risks that are going to affect you. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I can't see any more questions, Gifts.
There's also a question, I don't know whether this has been addressed. How does one categorize risk, e.g. into strategic, compliance, finance, etc.?
Oh, yes, I did.
Thank you. So I think the list I'm seeing here, I think we have okay, there's one which has just come in. How often should a risk review or reassessment be conducted?
Okay, thank you, Dawi Idi. So a risk review or assessment can be conducted either monthly, even weekly, quarterly. It depends with what it is, what risk it is. Is it a high risk? Is it a medium risk? Is it a low risk? What measures do you intend to put in place? So, for example, if you have a low risk, you can review it every quarter or every 6 months. If you have a medium risk and by your assessment, you deem it a sensitive risk, then you can review it every month. And for high risk, it's always important for that to be at the top of your head. Always ensure that you're literally on top of it, because if it materializes, then that means the impact will be very huge. So there's no one answer. It depends with how you've identified your risks and assessed them. That determines how often you review them. Thank you. Then there's another question from Paul who asks, which tools or methodologies can be effectively applied during risk identification and analysis? Okay, so Paul, we said that when you're identifying risks, apart from having the register itself, which is where you're going to record the risks that you come up with, some methods and techniques you can use include interviews, having a stakeholder analysis, conducting a SWOT analysis. You can also brainstorm between staff or colleagues. You can also undertake a root cause analysis. So there are quite a number, and they're all effective. Doesn't mean only use one. You can use all, or whichever one you would like to use. But there are quite a number of tools and methodologies. I hope that answers you. Then we'll proceed to Ali, who asks, where does the risk function domicile? Where is the risk function domiciled? Is it in the internal audit unit? Thank you, Ali, for this question. So previously, risk management fell under internal audit unit. However, with the new governance best practices, most internal auditors are expected to have oversight, independent oversight over what the organization does, which means if they are still the ones undertaking risk management, then there's really no separation of powers, and the independence is sort of blurred. So in recent times, those risk management and internal audit have been separated. Not all organizations have done this, but I know that this is where recent governance systems and processes are heading. So it should be ideally domiciled within the compliance unit or function within the organization. Yeah. Another question from Ali. He asks, can you automate the risk register? Yes, you can. And there are actually organizations that offer solutions such as this. So you can automate it. I haven't experienced that yet, but I know that there are certain organizations that actually have systems and applications where you can have an automated risk register. Then Lucy asks, what happens when a risk translates from low to high and the time for data collection is limited? Let me see. So this is quite interesting because if it moves from low to high, one, it means that the risk was not being monitored well enough, and therefore it's literally about to materialize, meaning it might affect, it's very likely to affect your data collection. So it would mean you put in stricter measures. We don't have an example here. You didn't give an example, but it would mean that first you need to make sure that you've put in enough treatment measures so that that risk that doesn't materialize. However, you can still proceed with data collection, but not business as usual, because the fact that it's moved from low to high means, you know, that's a huge red flag. Yeah, I hope that answers you. Okay.
Okay, Phyllis, there's a question
yes.
by David Onyango. I think I can help you answer that as you take a cup of water. So how can risk management knowledge and practice help in project management, monitoring and evaluation for a continuing project? Yeah, so risk management is important because if you are aware of the risks, then you are able to prepare treatment actions for those risks. And in project management, then you are able to implement your project more effectively. You are going to, as an organization or as a project, you will face minimal disruptions and you are able to complete your project successfully and on time. So basically, knowledge and effective risk management helps you in efficiently implementing your project, and you're able to meet your outcomes, project outcomes, with minimal disruptions. Then there's also a question by Lucy. If risks are not controllable, do we assume it as an opportunity to do things differently? Maybe Lucy, you may let me unmute you so that you can clarify your question. It is not very clear. Lucy, you can ask your question.
I think the question was answered because it was supposed to follow the other one. And where I was asking if the risk is running from low to high, what exactly are we supposed to do? And it was answered well by Phyllis, because he said that the risks are there. It's a red flag as you correct your data. But it is like I was feeling like sometimes if the risk is just transiting from one level to another, as much it's a red flag, maybe it will be an opportunity to do things in a different way. If you are going to do interviews, for example, maybe you prefer to use a different tool to correct that data. That is just what I have thought after the answer that has been given by Phyllis.
Okay. So basically it was a comment.
Yeah, I asked it before she started answering, but when she answered, she doubled. But I also now am commenting and saying maybe it's you can do things differently. If you wanted to be on the ground, maybe now you said your questionnaires, or maybe you use people on the ground there who have adapted to the kind of risks that are there. I was just trying to think around on the question I had asked earlier.
Yes, and you are very correct. Actually, some risks gives an opportunity to improve our processes and do things differently. So I am perfectly in agreement with you on that. Okay, so I think we have exhausted the questions. We have basically addressed all the questions on the chat. And I think there's just a request for us to share the materials. We are going to arrange for that. And so that you can have some reference materials, even as you seek to develop and improve your risk and opportunities registers. So I think we have come to the end of our session. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Phyllis for a very elaborate presentation, and also for answering the questions very well. And I also want to thank you, the participants, for participating, for coming in large numbers, and also asking questions and basically engaging us. We are really very humbled, and we look forward to engaging with you in the virtual academy and also in the next webinar that we are going to have next month. So thank you very much and have a good day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.